The Appalachian Mountains hide 10 terrifying stories, but what no one tells you is that they're connected. Each legend leaves a clue, a pattern too strange to ignore, and by the final story, that pattern becomes impossible to unsee. Welcome to Vesper Shroud. If you want the full picture, listen carefully. Every detail matters. And if something clicks for you before the ending, subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments which clue you caught first. Story 1. Mothman of Point Pleasant. The Appalachian Omen. I saw it 3 nights before the bridge fell, and I still cannot close my eyes without seeing those red orbs burning through the darkness. My name is irrelevant now. What matters is what happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the winter of 1967, and what I witnessed in those final horrifying days before everything collapsed. I was a state police officer then, 28 years old, stationed in Mason County. I thought I had seen everything the Appalachian backwoods could throw at me. Drunk drivers on Route 62, domestic disputes in trailer parks, the occasional missing hiker who wandered too deep into the hills. Normal small-town chaos. Nothing prepared me for what came crawling out of the TNT area that November. The first call came through dispatch on November 14th. A young couple, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, reported seeing something near the old munitions plant outside town. They were terrified, hysterical, claiming a creature had chased their car down Route 62 at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. When I arrived at the station, Roger was pale, shaking, his hands trembling so badly he could barely light a cigarette. He kept repeating the same phrases. Gray wings, red eyes, taller than any man. It flew alongside the car. It was not a bird. It was not human. I wrote it off as kids spooked by shadows and moonshine. The TNT area was a sprawling, abandoned network of concrete bunkers built during World War II, hidden deep in the West Virginia wilderness. It was creepy, sure, but harmless. Teenagers went there to drink and make out. Of course they saw things in the dark. But Roger, his eyes told a different story. That was not the look of someone playing a prank. That was the look of someone who had stared into something unsettling, something that should not exist. The sightings multiplied. Within days, dozens of people reported encounters with the creature. They described it the same way every time. Between 6 and 7 feet tall. Muscular, gray body. Wings folded against its back. No neck, just a head that seemed to sit directly on its shoulders. And those eyes, everyone mentioned the eyes, glowing red, like embers pulled from a fire, hypnotic and filled with a terrible intelligence. Some said the creature made no sound when it moved. Others reported a high-pitched shriek that made their ears ring for hours afterward. The newspapers started calling it Mothman, and the name stuck like a curse. I interviewed witness after witness, filling notebooks with descriptions that should have been impossible but were too consistent to ignore. A construction worker saw it perched on a tree near the old power plant, wings spread wide, watching him. A housewife spotted it hovering outside her kitchen window at 3 in the morning. A truck driver swerved off the road when the creature landed on the hood of his rig, staring at him through the windshield before launching itself back into the sky. These were not drunk kids. These were sober, working-class people, many of them church-going families who had lived in Point Pleasant their entire lives. They had no reason to lie. The fear in town became palpable. Hardware stores sold out of locks and floodlights. People stopped going out after dark. Churches held special prayer sessions. Parents kept their children inside. And still, the sightings continued. Always near the TNT area. Always at night. Always accompanied by that eerie, bone-deep dread that something catastrophic was approaching. I decided to investigate the bunkers myself. On the night of December 3rd, I drove out to the TNT area alone, armed with a flashlight and my service revolver. The entrance was marked by a rusted chain-link fence, torn open in several places by vandals and scavengers. Beyond it, the landscape transformed into something alien. Dozens of igloo-shaped concrete bunkers rose from the earth like burial mounds, overgrown with vines and surrounded by skeletal trees. The air smelled of decay and old chemicals. The silence was absolute, oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots. I walked for nearly an hour, shining my light into bunker after bunker. Most were empty, filled with stagnant water and graffiti. Some contained rusted barrels and debris from decades past. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. I was about to leave when I heard it, a sound like leather snapping in the wind. I turned, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line. That was when I saw the shadow. It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a massive oak. Even in silhouette, I could tell it was enormous. The wings were unmistakable, folded tight against its body, creating a hunched, predatory shape. I raised my flashlight higher, and the beam caught its face. There were no features, no mouth or nose, just smooth gray skin and those eyes. Red, glowing, fixed directly on me. I felt my chest tighten, my lungs refusing to pull air. The creature did not move. It simply watched, tilting its head slightly, as if studying me. Then it spread its wings. The span was incredible, at least 10 feet across, maybe more. Without warning, it launched itself into the air, rising straight up with a powerful thrust that sent dead leaves swirling around me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. By the time I regained my footing, it was gone, vanished into the black sky above the treetops. I ran back to my patrol car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I did not file a report. How could I? Who would believe me? But I knew what I had seen. Mothman was real, and it was not leaving. The sightings intensified in the days that followed. People reported strange lights in the sky. Televisions malfunctioned. Dogs howled at empty fields. Phone lines crackled with static and disembodied voices. A sense of doom settled over Point Pleasant like a fog. Several residents claimed they received disturbing phone calls in the middle of the night, voices whispering warnings about impending disaster. Some heard prophecies, others heard only laughter. The town felt cursed, haunted by something far older and more malevolent than any creature from the woods. On December 15th, a local reporter named Mary Heyer received a call at the Point Pleasant Register. The voice on the other end was strange, mechanical, claiming to be from a man who called himself Indrid Cold. He spoke about the Mothman, about the bridge, about tragedy. Mary dismissed it as a crank call, but she mentioned it to me later. There was something in her voice, a tremor of fear she could not quite hide. She said the caller knew things, personal things, details about her life that no stranger should have known. She asked me if I thought the sightings were connected to something bigger. I did not have an answer. December 16th arrived cold and gray. I was off duty, sitting in a diner on Main Street, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of everything. The Silver Bridge stretched across the Ohio River just outside, connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio. It was rush hour, and the bridge was packed with cars heading home for the evening. I watched through the window as the traffic crawled along, brake lights glowing red in the fading light. For a moment, I thought I saw something dark circling above the bridge, a winged shape gliding through the clouds. I blinked, and it was gone. At 5:05, the bridge collapsed. The sound was like thunder, a deep, groaning roar that shook the windows of the diner. I ran outside in time to see the entire structure fold in on itself, twisting and buckling as steel cables snapped like violin strings. Cars plunged into the freezing river below, screaming metal and glass disappearing beneath the black water. 46 people died that day. Men, women, children, families, friends, people I knew. The town was shattered, drowned in grief and horror. In the chaos that followed, the Mothman sightings stopped completely. The creature vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only questions and corpses. Investigators determined the collapse was caused by a structural failure, a tiny crack in an eye bar that had grown over time. A tragic accident. Nothing supernatural, nothing sinister, just bad engineering and bad luck. But I knew better. We all did. I left Point Pleasant 6 months later. I could not stay in a place where the shadows felt alive, where every bridge and road seemed fragile, temporary. I still think about those red eyes, the way they burned through the darkness like warnings we were too blind to understand. Was the Mothman trying to warn us? Or was it simply watching, waiting for the disaster it knew was coming? I do not have answers. All I know is that something emerged from the Appalachian wilderness in 1967. Something ancient and terrifying, and it saw the future written in our bones. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the sound of wings in the darkness. And I wonder if it ever really left, or if it is still out there, watching, waiting for the next collapse. The next tragedy. The next omen we will ignore until it is too late. The bridge fell decades ago, but the fear never did. It still lingers in the hills, in the abandoned bunkers, in the stories people whisper when the lights go out. Mothman is not gone. It is only sleeping. And one day, when the time is right, those red eyes will open again. Story 2. Green Figure. A Flatwoods Horror. I found the hospital records in a box my grandfather never meant me to see. September 1952. Braxton County Memorial. 12 patients admitted in one night with the same symptoms. Severe nausea, burning throat, convulsions. The scary part was not what the record said. It was what someone had written across the top in red ink. Do not discuss outside facility. The handwriting was shaking. My grandfather was the night nurse that evening in Flatwoods, West Virginia. He never spoke about it. Not once in 50 years. When he died last autumn, I inherited his things. That box was sealed with packing tape, buried under winter clothes in his attic. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and a journal with his name embossed on the cover. The first entry was dated September 13th, 1952. The night everything changed in our town. I grew up hearing whispers about the Flatwoods Monster. Every kid in Braxton County knew the story. Some creature with glowing eyes, a horrible smell, a green face. But I always thought it was just another Appalachian legend, something to scare tourists and sell postcards. Then I read my grandfather's journal. Now I know the truth is far more terrifying than any campfire story. And I know why he never wanted anyone to find these records. The journal started calmly enough. My grandfather described his shift beginning at 8 in the evening. A quiet Friday night. Most of Flatwoods had gathered at the high school for a football game. He was alone at the nurse's station when the first call came through. A woman from the Fisher farm, hysterical, screaming about something in the woods behind her property. Something that glowed, something that moved wrong. Then the calls multiplied. Within 20 minutes, the hospital received 7 more, all from the same area, all describing the same disturbing thing. A figure near the old May property on a hillside. Tall, impossibly tall, with a dark red face and eyes that burned green in the darkness. The descriptions matched too perfectly. These were not drunk teenagers playing pranks. These were farmers, teachers, a deputy sheriff, solid people who did not believe in monsters. My grandfather wrote that the fear in their voices was unlike anything he had heard before. It was primal, the kind of terror that strips away everything civilized and leaves only the desperate animal need to run. He could hear it crackling through the phone lines. He could feel it spreading through the town like poison in the bloodstream. By 9:15, the first patients arrived. A woman named Kathleen May, her 2 sons, a National Guardsman named Eugene Lemon, a few local boys who had gone to investigate the hillside. They stumbled through the emergency room doors looking like survivors of a chemical attack. Their faces were gray. Their eyes were bloodshot and streaming. They could barely stand without vomiting. The smell coming off them was like burning metal mixed with rotting flowers. Sickly sweet and sharp at the same time. The kind of smell that gets inside your nose and will not leave. My grandfather described how their hands trembled, how their pupils were dilated to the point where you could barely see any color, how they kept looking at the windows as if expecting something to smash through the glass. Eugene Lemon kept repeating the same sentence over and over. It was not an animal. It was not human. It was not anything from here. The doctor on duty that night was Philip Doherty. He was a practical man, a veteran of the war in the Pacific, not someone given to flights of imagination. But my grandfather wrote that even Dr. Doherty looked shaken after examining the patients. Their symptoms were consistent with exposure to something toxic, something caustic. But there was no industrial facility anywhere near the May property. No factories, no chemical plants, just forest and farmland stretching into the dark Appalachian hills. What disturbed my grandfather most was the consistency of their story. They had gone up the hillside together after seeing a bright object streak across the sky and land near the tree line. They thought it might be a meteorite, something interesting. But when they reached the top of the hill, they found something else entirely. A pulsing red light between the trees. A mist that hung in the air like oil smoke. And then the figure appeared. Eugene Lemon described it in his intake interview. My grandfather had copied the words directly into his journal. The creature was at least 10 feet tall. Its body seemed to float rather than stand. It wore something like a dark green hood or helmet with a window where a face should be. Behind that window was a red glow. Not reflected light, something internal. Something that pulsed with a rhythm like breathing. When it moved toward them, it made a hissing sound. High-pitched. Mechanical. Wrong. The most chilling detail came from Kathleen May. She said the creature had no legs. Or if it did, they were hidden beneath a dark pleated skirt that brushed the ground. It glided toward them, silent except for that hissing. And when it raised something that might have been arms, a foul mist sprayed from its body. That was when they ran. That was when the burning started. Within an hour, more people arrived at the hospital. Neighbors who had gone to help. Curious locals who got too close to the hillside. a journalist from the Braxton Democrat who had driven out to investigate. All of them had the same symptoms. All of them had the same haunted look in their eyes. The emergency room was full of people who had seen something that should not exist. Something that left physical evidence of its presence in their burning throats and racing hearts. My grandfather wrote that he went outside around 11 to clear his head. The autumn air was cool and clean, but even miles from the May property, he could smell something faint and metallic on the wind. Something that made his stomach turn. He looked toward the hills and saw lights. Not normal lights, pale green and flickering, moving through the trees in patterns that did not make sense. He went back inside and did not look at the hills again that night. The next morning, investigators arrived. State police, scientists from the university, even a few men in dark suits who would not identify themselves but asked very specific questions. They cordoned off the hillside. They took soil samples. They interviewed everyone who had been near the site. My grandfather watched them work from the hospital parking lot. He noticed how they wore respirators when they went into the woods. How they sealed everything they collected in metal containers. How they left before dark without explaining what they had found. The newspapers ran the story for a few days. The Flatwoods Monster became a sensation. Reporters came from as far as New York. They interviewed witnesses. They took photographs of the hillside. But the story died quickly. Too quickly, my grandfather thought. Within a week, the journalists were gone. The investigators were gone, and everyone who had been there that night stopped talking about it. Not because they had forgotten, because they had been told to forget. My grandfather included copies of letters in his journal, official letters from the county health department, from the state police, from unnamed federal agencies, all saying the same thing. The incident was under investigation. Witnesses should not discuss details publicly. Medical records were to be sealed. Anyone violating these instructions would face serious consequences. The letters were polite, but the threat underneath was clear. Stay quiet or face something worse than what you saw on the hillside. But my grandfather kept his records. He documented everything. The patients who returned weeks later with strange rashes. The nightmares that never stopped. The way dogs would bark at nothing in the forests around Flatwoods. The way certain areas of the hillside stayed barren for years afterward. No grass, no trees, just scorched earth that refused to heal. He wrote it all down in careful detail as if he knew someone would need to know the truth someday. The most disturbing entry came near the end of the journal. 3 months after the incident, December 1952, my grandfather wrote that he had gone back to the May property alone. He needed to see it in daylight, needed to understand what had really happened. He climbed the hillside where the witnesses had seen the creature. The trees were dead. Not dying, dead, gray and brittle. They crumbled when he touched them. The ground was covered in a fine metallic dust that clung to his boots. And in the center of the clearing, he found something that made his blood run cold. A perfect circle of burned grass, 20 feet across. In the middle of the circle were marks in the soil, deep impressions, not footprints, not tire tracks, something else. They formed a pattern, geometric, precise. My grandfather tried to sketch them in his journal, but his hand kept shaking. He wrote that standing in that circle made him feel watched. Made him feel small, made him understand that whatever had come to Flatwoods that September night was not from the mountains. It was not from West Virginia. It was not from anywhere on this earth. He left the hillside and never went back. He sealed his records. He tried to forget. But some things do not let you forget. Some things burn themselves into your memory like acid. Some things wait in the dark corners of your mind and whisper when you close your eyes. I finished reading the journal 3 days ago. Since then, I have not slept well. I keep thinking about those hospital records. 12 patients, same symptoms, same story, all dismissed as mass hysteria. Explained away as swamp gas or escaped circus animals or teenage pranks. But my grandfather knew better. He had seen the fear in their eyes. He had smelled that burning metal smell. He had touched the dead trees and felt the rawness in the soil. Last night, I drove out to Flatwoods. I needed to see the hillside for myself. The May property is abandoned now. Has been for decades. The house has collapsed. The barn is a skeleton of rotting wood. But the hillside is still there, still bare in places where nothing grows. I climbed up as the sun was setting, the same path those witnesses took in September 1952. My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. Every shadow looked like something watching. When I reached the top, I found the clearing. It was exactly as my grandfather described. The trees around it are still dead, still gray. The circle is still visible in the undergrowth. And in the center, those marks are still there. 70 years later, and they have not faded. They have not been covered by leaves or erosion or time. They are still there, still precise, still wrong. I stood in that circle as darkness fell over the Appalachian hills. I waited to feel something, to see something, to understand what my grandfather and those 12 patients had experienced. And then I smelled it, faint but unmistakable, burning metal, rotting flowers, that sickly sweet caustic smell that made my stomach lurch. I looked toward the tree line and saw something that stopped my heart. A pale green light, flickering between the dead trees, moving closer, and in that light, a shadow. Tall, too tall, with a shape that did not match anything natural. I did not wait to see more. I ran down that hillside faster than I have ever run in my life. I did not stop until I reached my car. I did not look back. I drove away from Flatwoods with my hands shaking on the wheel and that smell still in my nose. That horrible smell that will not leave. I am writing this now because I understand why my grandfather sealed those records. Why he never spoke about what he saw. Some truths are too terrifying to share. Some horrors are too real to acknowledge. Because if you admit they exist, if you say out loud that something came to Flatwoods in 1952 and left marks that will not fade and a smell that will not die, then you have to accept that it might come back. That it might still be here. That the green figure with the glowing eyes and the burning mist is not just a legend. It is something real, something patient, something waiting in the dark hills of West Virginia for the next time someone gets too curious and climbs the wrong hillside after sunset. I am sealing my grandfather's journal again. I am putting it back in the box. I am not going back to Flatwoods, but every night when I close my eyes, I see that green light flickering in the trees. I smell that metallic sweetness. And I know with absolute certainty that some doors should never be opened. Some questions should never be asked. Some monsters are real, and they are still out there, watching, waiting, glowing in the darkness of the Appalachian night. Story 3, Lost Holler, where the telegram stopped. The last telegram from Ashwood Holler arrived on November 3rd, 1946. After that, nothing. No messages, no letters, no phone calls, just silence from a coal town that housed 347 people. The scary part is that nobody went to check on them for 6 weeks. When they finally did, they found the town completely empty. Doors hanging open, meals still on tables, but not a single body, not a single clue, just an entire community that vanished into the Appalachian Mountains like smoke. I am a documentary researcher. I spend my time digging through old records and forgotten archives looking for stories that slip through the cracks of history. Last year, I found a file box in the basement of the Bluefield Telegraph office. Inside were dozens of unsent telegrams, all addressed to people in Ashwood Holler. All marked return to sender, location abandoned. The dates ranged from November through December of 1946. Christmas messages that never reached their families. The disturbing thing was how many of them asked the same question. Why have you stopped writing? Are you okay? Please respond. I became obsessed with finding out what happened to Ashwood Holler. The town does not appear on modern maps. Most local historians I contacted had never heard of it. But I kept digging through census records and mining company archives until I found evidence of its existence. A coal operation owned by Thornton Mining Company. Built in 1923. Nestled deep in the mountains of southern West Virginia. Population peaked at 400 in 1942. And then it just disappeared from all official records after November of 1946. The more I researched, the more unsettling details I discovered. Thornton Mining Company went bankrupt in 1947. Their records were sealed by court order. The mine itself was abandoned and the entrance was collapsed sometime in the early 50s. No explanation given. No investigation documented. Just another failed coal operation in the mountains. Except this one took an entire town with it into darkness and nobody seemed to care enough to ask why. I found one surviving reference in a state police report from December 1946. 2 officers had been sent to Ashwood Holler to investigate reports of missing persons. Their report was only 3 pages long, but what it described made my hands shake when I read it. They found the town completely intact but utterly deserted. Houses furnished, stores stocked, the company office still had paperwork on the desks, but every single resident was gone. The officers noted an eerie smell throughout the town, like sulfur mixed with something sweet and rotting. They also mentioned that all the animals were gone too. No dogs, no chickens, no livestock, nothing living remained in Ashwood Holler except the flies. The report ended with a recommendation for a full investigation. That investigation never happened. The file was closed, marked as resolved. No follow-up, no explanation. Just a bureaucratic stamp that said the matter was finished. But 347 people do not just vanish without leaving some trace. Without leaving some answer, I decided I needed to find Ashwood Holler myself. I needed to see what the mountains were hiding. Finding the town took me 3 months. Old mining maps are notoriously unreliable, and most of the roads that once led to these remote hollers have been reclaimed by the forest. But I eventually located the approximate area using surveyor records and satellite imagery. There was a dirt track that branched off a forgotten state route. Overgrown but still passable. I drove up that mountain road on a gray October morning with my camera equipment and a growing sense that I was making a terrible mistake. The forest pressed in on both sides, thick and dark, the kind of Appalachian wilderness that feels ancient and hostile. The trees were massive. Their branches formed a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. I drove for 40 minutes on that winding track, seeing nothing but woods and shadows. Then the road opened into a clearing and I saw the first building. A small church with a collapsed roof and broken windows. Beyond it, the rest of Ashwood Holler spread out like a nightmare frozen in time. The town was exactly as the police report described it. Intact but dead. Houses stood in neat rows along what had once been a main street. The company store was still there. The mine office. A schoolhouse. Everything covered in 70 years of decay and vegetation, but still recognizable. Still horrifying in its completeness. This was not a town that had been gradually abandoned. This was a place where life stopped all at once. Where people left mid-sentence and never came back. I parked near the church and got out. The silence was absolute. No birds. No insects. No wind. Just a heavy stillness that pressed against my ears like water. The air smelled wrong, musty and chemical, with that same sulfur sweetness the police had mentioned 7 decades ago. I took my camera and started walking down the main street. Every step felt like trespassing on something sacred and cursed at the same time. The first house I entered had belonged to a family named Marsh. I knew this because there was still mail on the table inside. Letters addressed to Robert and Helen Marsh. The house was small, 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. The furniture was rotted but still in place. A table set for dinner. Plates covered in black mold that had once held food. A pot on the stove filled with something that had long ago turned to dark sludge. It looked like they had been in the middle of an evening meal when something happened. Something that made them leave immediately without even clearing the table. What made it truly creepy was the lack of personal items. No photographs on the walls. No clothes in the wardrobes. No toys or books or anything that would indicate who these people really were. It was as if someone had come through after the fact and removed anything that might identify the residents. Anything that might give them individual faces and stories. They wanted Ashwood Holler to become a ghost town in every sense. A place with no history. No names. No memory. I moved through several more houses and found the same pattern. Meals abandoned. Furniture in place. But no personal effects. No trace of the people who had lived there. The schoolhouse was particularly disturbing. Small desks arranged in rows. A chalkboard with lessons still faintly visible. November 2nd, 1946. Spelling test tomorrow, but the children's slates were gone. Their books were gone. Any indication that specific children had sat in those desks and learned in that room had been systematically erased. The company store was worse. The shelves still held canned goods. Rusted but intact. The cash register was open. Empty. Behind the counter, I found a ledger book. The last entry was dated November 3rd. A purchase of flour and sugar by someone whose name had been blacked out with ink. Every single name in that ledger had been redacted. Page after page of transactions with the customers reduced to black bars. Someone had taken great care to ensure that no one could identify who had lived in Ashwood Holler. Who had shopped there. Who had existed in this place before it died. I saved the mine office for last. It sat at the end of the main street. A 2-story building with the Thornton Mining Company logo still visible on a faded sign. The door was locked, but the wood was so rotten that it gave way easily when I pushed. Inside, the smell was overwhelming. That sulfur sweetness mixed with decay and something else. Something chemical and industrial that burned my nose and made my eyes water. The office was in better condition than the houses. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. A large desk dominated the center of the room. Maps and charts were still pinned to the walls. I went to the filing cabinets first. Most of the drawers were empty. Cleaned out. But one cabinet in the back corner was jammed. The drawer would not open. I found a rusted letter opener on the desk and used it to pry the drawer open. Inside were personnel files, dozens of them, and these had not been redacted. I spread the files across the desk and started reading. Each one contained basic information about mine workers. Names, addresses in Ashwood Holler, family members, medical records, and then I found the reports that explained everything. The horrifying truth that had been buried with this town for 70 years. The mine had broken through into something in October of 1946. The reports called it a pocket. An underground void filled with gas. Not natural gas, something else. The workers who had been exposed started getting sick immediately. Severe respiratory problems, hallucinations, paranoia. But Thornton Mining Company did not shut down the operation. They sealed off that section and kept mining. They kept sending men down into the earth even as more and more workers became ill. Even as the sickness spread to their families above ground. The last report was dated November 2nd, written by the mine foreman. His handwriting was barely legible, shaking and uneven. He described how the entire town had been affected, how people were seeing things that were not there, hearing voices, becoming violent. The company doctor had recommended immediate evacuation, but the company owner had refused. Too expensive, too complicated. Instead, they decided to contain the situation, to wait it out, to see if the symptoms would fade on their own. That was the last official document in the file. But underneath the reports, I found something else. A handwritten note on personal stationery. Not an official company document. This was a confession, written by someone named Harrison Thornton, the company owner, dated December 15, 1946. The note described what happened on November 3rd, how the contamination reached a critical point, how the residents of Ashwood Holler began exhibiting severe psychological breakdown, mass hysteria, violence. The company made a decision. They could not let word of this disaster spread, could not let the world know that their negligence had poisoned an entire community. So they did something unspeakable. They evacuated the residents by force, loaded them onto trucks in the middle of the night, told them it was temporary, that they would be treated and returned home. But that never happened. Harrison Thornton wrote that the residents were taken to a facility. He did not specify where. He did not say what kind of facility. He only wrote that they were contained, that the situation was handled, that Ashwood Holler would be scrubbed from all records, made to disappear as if it had never existed. The note ended with a single sentence that made my blood turn to ice. God forgive us for what we did to those people, for what we had to do to keep them quiet. I stood in that office with Harrison Thornton, his confession in my hands, and understood the full scope of the horror. 347 people had been taken from their homes, taken from their lives, erased from history, because a mining company valued profit over safety, because they opened something in the earth that should have stayed sealed, because they were willing to do anything to avoid responsibility for their actions. But the story does not end there, because as I stood in that office reading that confession, I heard something outside. Footsteps on the wooden porch. Slow and deliberate. I looked toward the door and saw a shadow move across the dirty window. My heart stopped. I was alone on this mountain, miles from the nearest town. Nobody knew I was here. The footsteps circled the building. I could hear them clearly now. Multiple sets, walking in coordination, surrounding the office. I backed away from the door. My camera bag was still outside in my car. My phone had no signal this deep in the mountains. I was trapped with nowhere to run and no way to call for help. Then the smell hit me, stronger than before, that sulfur sweetness combined with something worse, something human and rotting. I heard breathing outside the walls, ragged and wet, the kind of breathing that comes from damaged lungs, from mouths that have not tasted clean air in decades. And I realized with absolute horror what I was hearing, who I was hearing. The residents of Ashwood Holler had never left the mountain. They had never been taken to any facility. They had been brought back here, dumped in the forest, left to die in the wilderness surrounding the town that poisoned them. And whatever that gas did to them, whatever contamination seeped into their bodies and minds, it had changed them, made them into something that could survive in these woods, something that had been waiting here for 70 years, waiting for someone to come looking, someone to finally tell their story. The door began to open, slowly, the hinges creaking. I saw fingers curl around the edge, gray and swollen, nails black and cracked. I pressed myself against the back wall. There was nowhere to go, no escape. The door swung wide and they came inside. 5 of them, maybe 6. It was hard to tell where one ended and another began in the darkness. They moved wrong, jerking and twitching. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were obscured by shadows and decay. They did not attack. They just stood there, watching me, breathing that horrible wet breathing. And then one of them reached out, not to grab me, to touch the files on the desk, the personnel records, the confession. They wanted me to understand, wanted me to know what had been done to them. They had been waiting for someone to find the truth, to document their existence, to prove that Ashwood Holler was real and that the people who lived there mattered. I did the only thing I could do. I took photographs, even though my hands were shaking, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. I documented everything, the figures in the office, the files, the confession. I worked as fast as I could while they watched. When I was finished, they stepped aside. Let me leave. I walked out of that office, past those twisted figures, down the main street of Ashwood Holler. Back to my car, they followed me the entire way. Silent escorts making sure I left with the evidence. I drove away from that town with tears streaming down my face and my heart hammering. I did not stop until I reached the highway. I submitted my findings to every historical society and archive I could find. Most ignored me, called my research unreliable, said the photographs were staged. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in Ashwood Holler. And I know that those people are still there. Still waiting. Still hoping that someone will finally force the world to remember them. The terrifying truth is how easily an entire community can be erased. How power and money can make 347 lives disappear without consequence. Harrison Thornton died wealthy and respected. His company went bankrupt, but he never faced justice. Never answered for what he did. And Ashwood Holler remains lost in the mountains. A ghost town haunted by the actual ghosts of the people who were betrayed by greed and left to rot in the darkness beneath the trees. I have nightmares now. Every night I see those figures. Those damaged people still trapped on that mountain. Still seeking recognition. Still demanding that someone acknowledge their existence and their suffering. Sometimes I wake up and smell sulfur. That sweet rotting smell. And I know they followed me home. Know that they will never let me forget. Because I am the only one who knows their story. The only one who can tell the world what really happened when the telegrams from Ashwood Holler stopped coming and an entire town disappeared into the haunted hills of Appalachia. Story 4. Matewan Massacre. Blood, Coal, and Appalachian Revenge. The coal dust never washes off, and neither does the blood that soaked into Matewan streets over a century ago. I am a mine safety inspector, 50 years old, third-generation coal country. My grandfather worked the mines in Mingo County, West Virginia. My father did too, until black lung took him at 52. I swore I would never go underground, but the coal always pulls you back. 3 months ago, I was sent to inspect an abandoned shaft near Matewan, the site of the bloodiest labor war in American history. What I found down there was not just old timbers and flooded tunnels. I found something that has been waiting in the darkness since 1920. Something that feeds on violence and remembers every drop of blood spilled in those hills. The Matewan Massacre was not just history. It was a curse. And it is still killing. Matewan sits in a narrow valley along the Tug Fork River, squeezed between steep mountains thick with scrub pine and darkness. In 1920, it was a company town, owned body and soul by the Stone Mountain Coal Company. Miners lived in company houses, shopped at company stores, paid rent and bought food with company scrip that was worthless anywhere else. They worked 12-hour shifts in tunnels that collapsed regularly, breathing coal dust that turned their lungs to stone, earning barely enough to survive. When they tried to organize, to demand fair wages and safe conditions, the coal companies brought in the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. Thugs with badges, hired guns paid to break strikes and terrorize workers. They evicted families, burned homes, beat union organizers in the streets. The tension in Matewan was suffocating, explosive, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came on May 19, 1920. 13 Baldwin Felts agents arrived in Matewan to evict miners who had joined the union. They went house to house, throwing families into the muddy streets, piling their belongings on the sidewalk. The town police chief, Sid Hatfield, a wiry, fearless man with ice blue eyes, confronted the agents. He told them their eviction notices were illegal, that they had no authority in his town. The agents laughed. They were above the law. They worked for the coal companies, and the coal companies owned everything. What happened next depends on who tells the story. Some say Hatfield drew first. Others say the detectives went for their guns. Either way, the street erupted in gunfire. Pistols and rifles barking, muzzle flashes lighting up the afternoon, bullets tearing through wooden storefronts and shattering windows. When the smoke cleared, 7 detectives lay dead in the street, along with the mayor and 2 miners. Blood ran between the cobblestones, mixing with coal dust and rainwater. The massacre shocked the nation. Newspapers called it a war zone. The governor deployed troops, but in the hollers around Matewan, people whispered about something else. A curse, a reckoning. The violence did not end that day. Over the next year, more men died. Union organizers gunned down on dirt roads. Company men found hanging from trees. Mysterious fires that consumed entire camps. The coal companies hired more detectives. The miners armed themselves and dug in. The conflict spiraled into open warfare, culminating in the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921. the largest armed insurrection in American history since the Civil War. 10,000 miners marched on Logan County, fighting pitched battles against company forces and federal troops. Bombs were dropped from airplanes. Machine guns mowed down men in the forests. By the time it ended, over 100 people were dead, maybe more. Nobody kept accurate records. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves, lost in the endless hills. The coal companies won, the Union was crushed, and Matewan became a ghost town, haunted by memories of blood and betrayal. I grew up hearing stories about Matewan. My grandfather told me the hollers around that town were cursed, that something dark had been awakened by all the killing. He said miners who worked the old shafts near the massacre site reported hearing voices underground, footsteps in abandoned tunnels, shadows that moved against the light. Some claimed they saw figures standing in the dark, men in old-fashioned clothes, faces black with coal dust, eyes burning with rage. Most dismissed it as superstition, the paranoia of men who spent too much time underground. But my grandfather believed it. He said the dead do not forget. And they do not forgive. The call came on a Friday in September. The state needed someone to inspect the old number 7 shaft outside Matewan. The mine had been sealed since the 1950s, but recent flooding had opened new fissures, and there were concerns about structural integrity affecting nearby properties. I drove down from Charleston, winding through the mountains on crumbling 2-lane roads, past abandoned tipples and rusted railroad tracks. Matewan looked frozen in time. Empty storefronts, boarded windows, a handful of old men sitting on porches, watching me with hollow eyes. The air smelled like sulfur and decay. I found the mine entrance on the edge of town, a gaping black mouth cut into the mountainside, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. The padlock had been cut. Fresh boot prints led inside. Vandals, probably, or kids looking for thrills. I grabbed my gear and went in. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling low, water dripping from rotted timbers. My headlamp beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls slick with moisture and mold. The air was cold, stale, thick with the smell of coal and something else. Something rotten. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, following the main shaft deeper into the mountain, my boots splashing through ankle-deep water. The silence was absolute. No drips, no settling rock, nothing, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my footsteps. Then I heard it, a voice, faint, distant, echoing from somewhere ahead. I stopped, straining to listen. It sounded like singing, a low, mournful tune, words I could not quite make out. I called out, asking if anyone was there. The singing stopped. The silence returned, but now it felt different. Heavier, watching. I continued forward, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, an old workroom where miners once took breaks and ate lunch. Rusted tools lay scattered on the ground. A wooden table sat in the center, covered in coal dust. And on the walls, scratched into the stone, were names. Dozens of them, hundreds. Names of miners who died in cave-ins, gas explosions, accidents. Names of men killed in the labor wars. I recognized some from history books. Others were unfamiliar. But they were all there, carved deep into the rock, a monument to the dead. And beneath the names, written in what looked like dried blood, was a message. They are still here. They are still angry. My heart hammered. I backed toward the entrance, but something moved in the tunnel behind me. A shadow, human-shaped, standing just beyond my light. I froze. The figure stepped forward, and I saw its face. A man, maybe 30, wearing coveralls and a mining helmet, his skin pale and stretched tight over bone, eyes black as coal. He stared at me, unblinking, his mouth opening as if to speak. But no words came out, only a hissing sound, like air escaping a punctured lung. Then another figure appeared, and another. They emerged from side tunnels, from cracks in the walls, from the darkness itself. Miners, dead miners, their clothes rotted, their faces gone, all of them staring at me with those horrible, empty eyes. I ran, stumbling through the flooded tunnel, my light bouncing wildly, their footsteps splashing behind me, growing louder, closer. I could hear them now, whispering, chanting, voices overlapping in a terrible chorus. Justice, revenge, blood. The entrance was ahead, daylight visible, but the shadows were faster. Cold hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me backward, and I felt fingers digging into my skin, nails like ice. I screamed, thrashing, and something gave way. I broke free, falling forward into the mud outside the mine. I scrambled to my feet and turned back. The tunnel was empty, silent, no figures, no voices, just darkness. I reported the incident, but nobody believed me. They said I was dehydrated, confused, that old mines play tricks on your mind. They sealed the entrance with concrete and marked the area off limits. But I know what I saw. The dead of Matewan are still down there, trapped in those tunnels, reliving their deaths, waiting for someone to pay for what was done to them. The coal companies never faced justice. The detectives who murdered union men walked free. The miners who died fighting for their rights were forgotten, buried in unmarked graves, their names erased from history. But the mountain remembers, and so do the dead. I have not slept properly since that day. Every night, I hear the whispers. I see their faces in the darkness. I dream of tunnels that go on forever, filled with shadows that want to drag me down into the black. Matewan is still haunted, not by ghosts, but by something far worse. By rage, by injustice, by blood that never dried. The curse is real, and it is spreading. Other mines in Mingo County have reported strange occurrences, equipment failures, unexplained accidents, workers hearing voices underground. The dead are restless, and they are coming back. Story 5. Trail of Fear. Murders along the Appalachian Trail. The last text my hiking partner sent me was just 2 words. He's following. I am a thru hiker who survived something on the Appalachian Trail that the Park Service does not want you to know about. My name does not matter. What matters is that the AT, that beautiful 2,200-mile stretch of wilderness running from Georgia to Maine, is not safe. It has never been safe. For decades, hikers have vanished into those woods. Their bodies found weeks later or never found at all. Some were murdered by drifters and psychopaths who prey on solo travelers. Others simply disappeared, swallowed by the forest without a trace. The authorities call them isolated incidents, random tragedies, bad luck. But I know the truth. There is something hunting on the Appalachian Trail. Something that has been there since before the white blaze markers were painted, before the shelters were built, before anyone gave the path a name. And it is still out there, waiting in the darkness between the trees. I started my thru hike in March, leaving Springer Mountain in Georgia with my best friend Marcus. We were experienced backpackers, both of us in our early 40s, fit and prepared. We carried quality gear, GPS devices, satellite phones for emergencies. We studied the trail guides, memorized shelter locations, knew the protocols. We thought we were ready. The first 2 weeks were perfect. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, breathtaking views. We hiked through blooming rhododendrons and ancient hardwood forests, crossing mountain ridges that stretched forever. We met other hikers at shelters, shared meals, swapped stories. The trail community was welcoming, supportive. Everyone looked out for each other. But as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, moving through Tennessee and into North Carolina, something changed. The atmosphere grew heavier. The woods felt darker, older, watching. Other hikers mentioned it too. A sense of unease in certain sections, particularly in the remote stretches between towns. They talked about feeling followed, hearing footsteps behind them that stopped when they stopped, seeing shapes moving through the trees just beyond their vision. Most laughed it off as paranoia, the isolation playing tricks on tired minds. But some took it seriously. An older hiker named Dale told us about the murders. Real cases, documented and horrifying. In 1974, a woman was stabbed to death near the Hawk Mountain Shelter in Georgia. In 1981, 2 hikers were shot and killed in Pennsylvania. In 1990, a couple was murdered in their tent in Pennsylvania. In 1996, 2 women were killed in Shenandoah National Park. The list went on. Dozens of attacks over the decades. Bodies found in shelters, along the trail, buried in shallow graves. Some killers were caught. Most were not. The trail had a dark history, Dale said. A legacy of violence that nobody wanted to talk about because it was bad for tourism, bad for the image of America, this most beloved hiking path. Marcus and I dismissed Dale as warnings. We were careful, we said. We would not camp alone in isolated areas. We would stay aware, trust our instincts. But the truth is, no amount of preparation can protect you from what lies in those mountains. We learned that the hard way. It started in the Nantahala National Forest, around mile 200. We camped at a shelter near Weabald, a stone structure with 3 walls and a wooden floor, built to accommodate 8 hikers. Only 2 others were there that night, a young couple from Ohio. They were quiet, nervous, barely spoke during dinner. When Marcus asked if they were okay, the woman said they had heard something earlier that day while hiking. Footsteps keeping pace with them on a parallel path, just out of sight in the thick undergrowth. When they stopped to listen, the footsteps stopped too. When they started walking again, so did the footsteps. They eventually broke into a run and did not stop until they reached the shelter. Her boyfriend insisted it was probably a deer or black bear, but his hands shook when he said it. They left before dawn the next morning without saying goodbye. Marcus and I continued north. The weather turned cold, rain falling in sheets, turning the trail into a muddy slog. We hiked through fog so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The forest seemed to close in around us, trees leaning over the path like skeletal fingers. We stopped hearing birds. No squirrels rustling through leaves. No insects buzzing. Just silence and the sound of rain drumming on our packs. On the 3rd day after leaving Wea Bald, Marcus noticed fresh footprints in the mud behind us. Boot prints, size 11 or 12, following our exact path. We had not seen another hiker all day. The prints were not there an hour before when we passed the same spot during a break. Someone was tracking us, staying just out of sight, matching our pace. We picked up speed, pushing hard toward the next shelter 5 miles ahead. The footprints followed. We reached the shelter just before dark, exhausted and drenched. It was empty. We set up our sleeping bags, started a fire in the stone pit outside, boiled water for dinner. Marcus kept checking the trail behind us, his headlamp sweeping the trees. Nothing, just rain and darkness, but we both felt it. That creeping, suffocating sensation of being watched. We decided to take turns keeping watch. Marcus volunteered for the first shift. I crawled into my sleeping bag, too tired to argue, and passed out almost immediately. I woke to Marcus shaking me violently. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed toward the woods. Someone was standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away, partially hidden behind a massive oak. A man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes and a hood that shadowed his face. He was not moving, just standing there, staring. Marcus called out, asking if the man needed help, if he wanted to share the shelter. No response. The figure remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow. We waited, hearts pounding, neither of us knowing what to do. Then the man turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the rain and darkness without a sound. We did not sleep that night. We sat back to back, headlamps on, watching the woods. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch sent adrenaline spiking through our veins. Dawn could not come fast enough. When the first gray light filtered through the trees, we packed our gear and left, practically running down the trail. We did not stop until we reached the town of Franklin, 15 miles away, collapsing into a cheap motel and locking the door behind us. Marcus wanted to quit. He said the trail was not worth dying for, that something was wrong, that we should go home. I convinced him to continue. I told him we were being paranoid, that the man at the shelter was probably just another hiker, socially awkward and harmless. I was wrong. 2 days later, back on the trail, Marcus vanished. We were hiking through the Great Smoky Mountains, a section known for its beauty and its danger. The trail was steep, rocky, exposed. Fog rolled in around noon, thick and disorienting. Marcus was ahead of me by maybe 20 yards, visible only as a vague shape in the mist. I stopped to adjust my pack. When I looked up, he was gone. I called his name. No answer. I ran forward, scanning the trail, the trees, the drop-offs. Nothing. I pulled out my phone, tried calling him. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Panic set in. I searched for over an hour, shouting until my voice was raw, retracing our path, checking every side trail and clearing. He had simply disappeared. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. 2 words, he is following. I tried calling again, straight to voicemail. I texted back, asking where he was, what was happening. No response. I contacted park rangers, reported him missing. They organized a search party, brought in dogs and helicopters. They found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no sign of struggle. It was as if Marcus had been erased from existence. The official report listed him as lost, presumed dead, victim of a fall or exposure. But I knew better. Someone, or something, had taken him. And whatever sent that text was not Marcus. I left the trail that day. I have not gone back. But the nightmares never stop. I see Marcus in the fog, his face twisted in silent terror, reaching for me as something drags him backward into the trees. I hear his voice whispering my name from dark places, begging me to find him. And sometimes, late at night, I receive texts from his number. Always 2 words, always the same message: he is following. The Appalachian Trail is not just a hiking path. It is a hunting ground, a place where the boundaries between civilization and wilderness blur, where people disappear and nobody asks the right questions. The murders are real, the disappearances are real, and the thing that stalks those mountains is still out there, waiting for the next hiker to wander too far from safety. If you ever walk that trail, remember this: stay in groups, never hike alone, and if you feel something following you, do not stop. Do not look back, just run. Story 6. Bell Witch Echo, Appalachia, as oldest haunting. The voice in my grandmother's house spoke my name 3 nights before she died, and it knew things about me that nobody living should have known. I am a medical researcher, 46 years old, born and raised in Robertson County, Tennessee. I spent my career studying the brain, trying to understand consciousness, memory, and the line between sanity and madness. I thought I had answers. I thought science could explain everything. Then I inherited my grandmother's farmhouse in Adams, Tennessee, 5 miles from the old Bell property. And I learned that some horrors cannot be measured or rationalized. The Bell Witch is not a legend. It is not folklore passed down through generations of superstitious farmers. It is real. It has been haunting the hills of Appalachia for over 200 years. And it came for me the moment I stepped through that door. The Bell Witch story started in 1817 when a prosperous farmer named John Bell began experiencing strange phenomena on his property near the Red River in Tennessee. It began with sounds, knocking on the walls, scratching inside the house, chains dragging across floors. Then the children started reporting sightings. A dark figure in the fields, a woman with wild hair standing at the foot of their beds, animals behaving strangely, dogs barking at empty corners, horses refusing to enter certain areas of the property. John dismissed it as imagination until the attacks began. Invisible hands pulled hair, slapped faces, yanked blankets off beds in the middle of the night. His daughter Betsy suffered the worst of it. She was beaten by unseen forces, bruises appearing on her arms and legs, scratches manifesting on her skin. The family tried everything. They brought in ministers to perform exorcisms. They consulted doctors who found no medical explanation. They even invited Andrew Jackson, future president of the United States, who witnessed the phenomena firsthand and fled the property, claiming he would rather fight the British again than spend another night in that house. The entity eventually spoke, a disembodied voice that filled rooms, sometimes whispering, sometimes screaming, always malevolent. It claimed to be the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor John Bell had wronged in a land dispute. It called itself a witch, though witnesses said it seemed more like a demon, something ancient and evil that had existed long before Kate Batts was born. It tormented the family for 4 years. In 1820, John Bell died under mysterious circumstances, poisoned by a bottle of strange black liquid found in his medicine cabinet. The voice laughed at his funeral, singing vulgar songs, celebrating his death. Then it vanished, promising to return in 7 years. It did. In 1828, it came back briefly, harassing the family again before disappearing with another promise. It would return in 107 years. That date came and went in 1935. But the voice never truly left. It migrated through the Appalachian hills, following bloodlines, attaching itself to descendants of the Bell family and anyone foolish enough to dig into the story. Court documents from the era describe the case in chilling detail. Medical accounts note injuries that appeared spontaneously. Modern paranormal researchers have documented hundreds of encounters in the region. The witch is still here. And it remembers. My grandmother was a Bell descendant, though she never spoke about it. She lived alone in a 2-story farmhouse built in 1890, surrounded by overgrown fields and dark woods that pressed close to the property. I visited her once a year when I was growing up, and I hated every moment. The house felt wrong. Cold spots in the summer, doors that opened on their own, shadows that moved when you were not looking. My grandmother would smile when I asked about it, saying old houses have personalities. But I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew something was there. She just refused to name it. When she died last March, she left the house to me. I almost sold it immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to understand what she had been hiding. I wanted to apply my scientific training to the mystery. I thought I could debunk the legend, expose it as mass hysteria or environmental factors. I was so arrogant, so blind. I moved into the house in late April. The first week was uneventful. I spent my days cataloging her belongings, boxes of old letters and photographs, journals dating back generations. I found references to the Bell Witch scattered throughout the family history. Accounts of strange occurrences, unexplained deaths, mental breakdowns. One journal entry from 1902 described a voice calling from the walls, demanding blood. Another from 1954 mentioned a family member who heard her name whispered constantly until she threw herself down the stairs. The pattern was clear. The witch had never left. It had simply moved, following the bloodline through the Appalachian hills, feeding on fear and suffering. The first time I heard the voice was on my 8th night in the house. I was asleep in the upstairs bedroom when something woke me around 3 in the morning. The room was freezing, my breath misting in the air despite the warm spring weather. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, low and rasping, coming from the corner near the closet. It spoke my name, not loudly, almost a whisper, but clear enough to make my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, swept it across the room. Nothing. Empty corners. Closed closet door. I told myself it was a dream, the house settling, my imagination running wild. But the voice came again, this time closer, right next to the bed. It said my name again, followed by something that made my blood turn to ice. It recited my social security number, every digit. Perfect. I bolted from the room, running downstairs, turning on every light in the house. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, shaking, trying to rationalize what I had heard. There was no logical explanation. Nobody knew my social security number except me and a few government agencies. It was not something my grandmother would have known or written down. The voice had accessed information that should have been impossible to obtain. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. Objects moved when I was not looking. Books fell from shelves. Doors slammed shut with no wind. The voice returned every night, always at 3 in the morning, always whispering secrets. It told me things about my past, mistakes I had made, lies I had told, private moments I thought were buried. It knew everything, and it used that knowledge to torment me, to break me down, to make me doubt my own mind. I tried to leave. I packed my bags, got in my car, started driving toward Nashville. But something stopped me, an overwhelming compulsion to turn around, to go back. I found myself pulling into the driveway 20 minutes later, unable to remember making the decision. The witch would not let me leave. I was trapped, bound to the property the same way my ancestors had been. I contacted paranormal investigators, desperate for help. They came with equipment, cameras, electromagnetic sensors. They recorded strange readings throughout the house. Cold spots, energy spikes, electronic voice phenomena. One investigator captured audio of the voice on his recorder. It was saying my name, over and over, in a sing-song tone that made everyone in the room go silent. But they could not help me. They said the entity was too powerful, too deeply rooted. Their advice was to abandon the house and never return. But I could not. The witch had its hooks in me. I was part of the story now. The attacks began 2 weeks after I moved in. I woke with scratches on my arms, 3 parallel lines carved into my skin. Bruises appeared on my legs, handprints on my shoulders. I felt invisible hands grabbing me in the dark, pulling my hair, shoving me downstairs. The voice grew louder, angrier, no longer whispering but shouting. It called me by my full name, cursed me, accused me of crimes I had not committed. It said I was chosen, that I would be the next sacrifice, that the Bell family blood demanded payment. I started drinking to numb the fear, to dull the horror of what was happening. But alcohol made it worse. The voice came during the day now, taunting me while I was awake, fully conscious. I saw shadows moving through the house, dark figures that watched from doorways and corners. One night, I saw her, the witch, standing at the foot of my bed, a woman with tangled black hair and hollow eyes, her mouth open in a silent scream. She reached for me, her fingers stretching impossibly long, and I felt cold hands wrap around my throat. I could not breathe. I thrashed and kicked, but the grip tightened. Just as I was about to pass out, she released me. She smiled, a grotesque, triumphant grin, and vanished. I found my grandmother's final journal entry hidden in the attic 3 days ago. It was dated the week before she died. She wrote about the witch, about the pact the Bell family had made generations ago. John Bell had not been an innocent victim. He had summoned something, bargained with a dark force for prosperity and power. And when he tried to break the deal, the witch punished him. It punished his entire bloodline. Every generation, it claimed one life, a sacrifice to maintain the contract. My grandmother had been the previous sacrifice. Now it was my turn. She wrote that there was no escape. The witch would take what it was owed. She apologized for leaving me the house, for passing the curse to me. But someone had to carry it. The bloodline had to continue. Otherwise, the witch would spread beyond the family, consume the entire region, unleash itself on the world. I am writing this as my final act. The voice is with me now, whispering in my ear, telling me it is time. I feel cold hands on my shoulders, guiding me toward the basement. I know what waits for me down there. The same black liquid that killed John Bell. The same fate that claimed my grandmother. I am terrified, but I am also strangely calm. The witch has won. It always wins. If you are reading this, if you have any connection to the Bell family, any tie to Robertson County, leave. Sell your property. Break the bloodline. Do not let the witch claim you. It is patient. It is eternal. And it never forgets. Story 7. Whispers of Mamie Thurman. I found the photograph in my grandmother's attic 3 weeks after her funeral. A young woman standing on a porch. Pretty face, dark hair, eyes that looked directly at the camera with an expression I could not quite read. Fear maybe, or defiance. On the back, someone had written in faded pencil, Mamie Thurman, June 1932. 2 months before they found her body in Mingo County. The scary thing was not the photograph itself. It was what happened when I brought it downstairs into the light. The woman in the picture seemed to move, just slightly, as if she had been waiting 70 years for someone to finally look at her again. My grandmother never spoke about Mamie Thurman. None of the old-timers in our West Virginia hollow would discuss her either. They would change the subject, look away, act like they had not heard the question. But I knew the name. Everyone in southern West Virginia knows that name, even if they pretend not to. Mamie Thurman was murdered in the summer of 1932, and her killer was never officially caught. The case became an obsession in these mountains, a wound that never healed, a story that got told in whispers and passed down through generations like a curse. I am a high school history teacher. I have always been drawn to unsolved mysteries and forgotten stories. Finding that photograph felt like a sign, like Mamie herself had reached across decades to pull me into her story. I decided to research the case properly, to find out what really happened on that horrifying night in August when a young wife and mother was beaten to death in her own home while her children slept in the next room. What I discovered was far more disturbing than any legend, because the truth about Mamie Thurman is not just about murder. It is about silence, about a community that chose to protect a killer, about justice denied so completely that it poisoned an entire region. The basic facts are these. Mamie Thurman was 23 years old, married to a man named Clarence Thurman. They had 2 small children. They lived in a remote house near the Kentucky border. On August 18, 1932, someone came to that house in the middle of the night. Someone who beat Mamie with such rage that her skull was fractured in multiple places. The children woke to find their mother dying on the kitchen floor. Blood everywhere, her face unrecognizable. She lived for 3 more days in the hospital, long enough to whisper a name to the sheriff. Then she died. The name she whispered was never made public. The official investigation went nowhere. No arrests, no trial. The case was quietly closed within 6 months. And Mamie Thurman became a ghost story, a cautionary tale, a name that mothers used to scare their daughters into obedience. But underneath the folklore, underneath the legends and the songs and the poems that were written about her, there was a real woman who died in terror, who fought for her life, who tried to tell the truth before she slipped into darkness, and someone made sure that truth died with her. I started my research at the county courthouse. Most of the original case files were gone, lost in a fire in 1958. Convenient, I thought, but I found newspaper clippings on microfilm. The Williamson Daily News had covered the story extensively. The articles painted a picture of a community in shock, a brutal crime in a place where people did not lock their doors, where neighbors trusted neighbors. The early reports mentioned multiple suspects, men who were known to have visited the Thurman house, men who had reasons to want Mamie silenced. One name appeared more than others in those early articles. A local businessman named Elias Harmon, wealthy by mountain standards, connected to the coal companies and the political machine that ran Mingo County. The newspaper reported that Sheriff Morrison had questioned Harmon twice, that there were witnesses who placed him near the Thurman house the night of the murder, that Mamie herself had complained to friends about Harmon bothering her, making unwanted advances, threatening her when she refused him. And then suddenly, after 2 weeks of coverage, Harmon's name disappeared from the articles. Never mentioned again. The investigation shifted to vagrants, drifters, anonymous strangers who conveniently could not be found. I found something else in those newspaper archives, something that made my skin crawl. A small article from September 1932. A house fire in the hollow where Mamie had lived, the home of a man named Daniel Creek. He had been one of the witnesses who claimed to see Elias Harmon near the Thurman house. His statement was in the sheriff's file. 3 weeks after giving that statement, his house burned down with him inside. Accidental, the fire marshal ruled. But the timing was disturbing, impossible to ignore. I drove out to Mingo County to see the locations for myself. The Thurman house was long gone, torn down in the 50s, but the foundation was still there, overgrown with weeds and scrub brush. The land felt wrong, heavy, the kind of place where the air sits thick and still even on windy days. I stood where the kitchen would have been, where Mamie fell, where she bled, where she fought for her life while her children screamed in the next room. I took photographs, made notes, and I felt watched, felt like something in those trees was paying attention to my presence. The local historical society had more information. An elderly librarian named Ruth showed me their collection of oral histories. Recorded interviews with people who remembered the case. Most of them were recorded in the 70s and 80s. Old people then remembering when they were young. Their stories were consistent in disturbing ways. They all said the same thing. Everyone knew who killed Mamie Thurman. Everyone knew why, but nobody would say it out loud. The fear was too great. The consequences too severe. One recording stood out. A woman named Sarah Booth. She had been Mamie's closest friend. In the interview, her voice shook when she spoke about that August night. She described how Mamie had confided in her days before the murder. How Mamie was terrified. How she had received threats. How she wanted to leave Clarence and take the children somewhere safe but had no money and nowhere to go. Sarah said that Mamie knew too much about certain people. Had seen things she should not have seen. Had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and became a liability that needed to be eliminated. Sarah Booth died 2 months after that interview was recorded. Fell down her basement stairs. Accidental death, according to the coroner. But the librarian told me that Sarah had been healthy, active, not prone to falls, and her family always believed there was more to the story. That someone wanted her quiet. Even 40 years after Mamie's death, the fear was still alive. Still controlling what people could say. I found Clarence Thurman's grave in a small cemetery outside Williamson. He died in 1968. On his headstone, someone had carved an additional line below his name. He knew. He said nothing. I stood there staring at those words. Someone had literally etched an accusation into stone. A permanent reminder that Clarence Thurman had failed his wife. Had known who killed her and chose silence. Chose his own safety over justice. Chose to let a murderer walk free. The more I researched, the more names I found. People connected to the case who died under suspicious circumstances. A deputy sheriff who resigned suddenly and left the state. Found dead in Ohio 6 months later. Suicide, they said. A newspaper reporter who wrote the most aggressive articles about Elias Harmon. He was beaten nearly to death in an alley behind his office. Never wrote about the case again. Never identified his attackers. A doctor who treated Mamie in the hospital and heard her whisper that name. He moved his practice to another county within weeks. Refused to testify. Refused to ever discuss what he heard. The pattern was clear. Terrifying. Anyone who threatened to expose the truth about Mamie Thurman, this murder was silenced. Through violence. Through intimidation. Through convenient accidents. And Elias Harmon lived to be 84 years old. Died wealthy and respected. His obituary in the Williamson Daily News praised his contributions to the community. Called him a pillar of Mingo County. Never mentioned Mamie Thurman. Never acknowledged the blood on his hands. I visited Harmon's grave too. It is in a fancy cemetery on a hillside. Marble headstone, well maintained, but someone visits that grave regularly for a different reason. The stone is covered in scratches, deep gouges, as if people have been trying to deface it for decades. To literally scratch out his name, to erase him the way he tried to erase Mamie. The groundskeeper told me they have to clean the vandalism every few months. That it never stops. That people still come to that grave filled with rage and grief even though everyone involved is long dead. I spent 3 months researching the case, reading every document I could find, interviewing anyone who would talk, building a timeline, gathering evidence, and I became convinced that I had enough to write a definitive account. To finally tell Mamie's story the way it deserved to be told. to name her killer, to explain why justice failed. I started writing, working late into the nights, obsessed with getting every detail right. That is when the whispers started. I would hear them in my house. Late at night, a woman's voice, soft and sad. I could never make out the words, just the tone, the emotion. At first, I thought it was my imagination, stress from the research, but the whispers got louder, more insistent, and they always came from the room where I kept Mamie's photograph, the one from my grandmother's attic. I would go to that room and the air would be cold. My breath would fog, and I would feel a presence, something desperate, something that had been waiting a very long time to be heard. I started having nightmares, the same dream every night. I am standing in a dark kitchen, blood on the floor, a woman lying there, her face turned away. She is trying to speak, reaching toward me, but I cannot move, cannot help. I can only watch as she dies. And in the dream, I know that I am seeing what happened. That Mamie is showing me her last moments, showing me the truth that was buried with her. I finished my research, compiled everything into a detailed report. I plan to publish it online, to finally break the silence that had protected a murderer for 90 years. But the night before I was going to post it, something happened that changed everything. I woke to the smell of smoke. My office was on fire. Not the whole house, just my office, just the room where I kept all my research. All my notes, the photograph, everything related to Mamie Thurman. The fire department said it was electrical, old wiring, bad luck. But I knew better. I rebuilt what I could from memory and backup files. But some things were lost. Key documents, original photographs, evidence that could not be replaced. And I realized something chilling. The same forces that silenced people in 1932 were still active. Still protecting the memory of Elias Harmon. Still ensuring that certain truths remained buried. His family was still prominent in the region. Still wealthy, still connected, and they did not want their ancestor's reputation destroyed by a teacher with a laptop and too much curiosity. I published what I could, a shortened version, carefully worded, but even that brought consequences. I was passed over for a promotion at work. My car was vandalized. I received anonymous letters, messages warning me to stop digging into the past, to let the dead stay buried. The fear that had controlled this story for 90 years was reaching forward, touching me, reminding me that some secrets are protected with a viciousness that does not fade with time. But here's what terrifies me most. The whispers have not stopped. Mamie's voice still echoes in my house. Still pleading, still desperate, because she knows I failed her too. I had the chance to tell her complete story, to name her killer without equivocation, to demand justice even if it came 90 years too late. But I chose safety, chose to soften the truth, chose to protect myself instead of honoring her memory. I became just another person in a long line of people who knew what happened to Mamie Thurman and said nothing. The photograph was destroyed in the fire, but sometimes I still see her, standing in the corner of my vision, a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes, watching me, judging me, reminding me that silence is complicity, that choosing comfort over truth makes us accomplices to injustice. Mamie Thurman was murdered twice, once by the hands that beat her to death, and once by the community that decided her truth was too dangerous to speak, too inconvenient to pursue, too damaging to important people to acknowledge. I keep researching, quietly, carefully, building a case that cannot be burned, cannot be silenced, waiting for the right moment to release everything I know. But the fear is real. The danger is real. And I understand now why so many people chose silence. Why the story of Mamie Thurman became folklore instead of history. Why her murder remains officially unsolved even though everyone in these mountains knows exactly what happened and exactly who did it. The most disturbing part is how common this story is. How many Mamie Thurmans are buried in these Appalachian hills? How many women were silenced? How many murders were covered up because the killers had money or power or connections? How many families still carry the weight of secrets that should have been exposed generations ago? The mountains are full of ghosts, full of unavenged deaths, full of whispers that will not die because the truth was never allowed to live. I still hear Mamie's voice at night, still feel her presence in my home. And I know she will not rest until someone finally has the courage to tell her story without fear, without compromise, without the silence that has protected her killer's memory for 90 years. She is waiting, patient and persistent, a ghost who refuses to fade, a victim who will not be forgotten. And she is not alone. There are others like her, waiting in the darkness, whispering from the shadows, demanding that someone finally listen, finally care, finally choose truth over comfort and justice over silence. That is the real horror of Mamie Thurman. Not just that she was murdered, but that her murder was acceptable. That a community decided her life was worth less than the reputation of a wealthy man. That her children grew up knowing their mother, this killer, walked free. That generation after generation learned that some truths are too dangerous to speak. That justice is not blind. It sees exactly who has power and who does not, and it adjusts accordingly. That is the nightmare that haunts these mountains. That is the whisper that will not die. And until someone finally breaks the silence completely, Mamie Thurman will keep reaching from the grave. Keep showing up in photographs. Keep speaking in the darkness. Keep reminding us that the dead do not forget, and they do not forgive those who choose comfort over courage. Story 8. Snallygaster and Sky Beasts. Flying terrors over the ridge. The thing that killed my livestock had a wingspan longer than my barn, and when it screamed, the sound shattered every window in my farmhouse. I am a fifth-generation cattle rancher in Frederick County, Maryland, working land my family has owned since before the Civil War. I am 53 years old, practical, not the kind of man who believes in fairy tales or cryptids or things that go bump in the night. But what I saw circling my property 3 months ago was not a bird. It was not a plane. It was not anything that should exist in this world. The old-timers in these Appalachian foothills have stories about flying creatures, monsters with metallic scales and razor teeth that hunted livestock and terrorized farms over a century ago. They called it the Snallygaster, a German folk legend brought over by settlers, a dragon-like beast that supposedly disappeared in the 1930s. I thought it was nonsense. Campfire tales to scare children. Then I found my best bull ripped apart in the north pasture, claw marks gouged 6 inches deep into its hide, and massive 3-toed tracks pressed into the mud. Tracks that could only belong to something massive. Something that flies. Something that is still hunting in these mountains. The Snallygaster legend goes back to the 1730s when German immigrants settled in the valleys between South Mountain and Catoctin Mountain. They brought with them stories of the Schnellergeist, a fast ghost or spirit that terrorized villages in the old country. In America, the creature evolved, becoming more physical, more monstrous. Newspaper accounts from the late 1800s and early 1900s describe a beast with enormous wings, a long reptilian body covered in green and black scales, sharp teeth like daggers, and a single eye in the center of its forehead. Farmers reported finding mutilated cattle with their blood drained. Children vanished while playing near the woods. Men hunting at dusk saw shadows pass overhead, blotting out the moon. The sightings peaked in 1909 when the Middletown Valley Register published dozens of eyewitness accounts. A man named Casper Mencher claimed the creature swooped down on him while he was plowing his field, talons scraping his scalp before he dove into a ditch. Another farmer fired both barrels of his shotgun at it, hitting it square in the chest, but the pellets bounced off its hide like rain on stone. The beast shrieked, a sound described as metal scraping metal mixed with a woman screaming, and flew off toward the mountains. The government got involved in 1932 when President Hoover ordered federal agents to investigate reports of the Snallygaster near Camp David, which was being constructed in the Catoctin Mountains. The official story is that agents found no evidence of any creature and dismissed the sightings as mass hysteria fueled by Prohibition-era moonshine operations. But documents declassified decades later revealed something different. Agents did find evidence. Massive nests built in caves high on the ridges, bones of deer, livestock, and unidentified animals piled in crude feeding grounds. And photographs. Blurry, grainy images of something dark and winged perched on a rocky outcrop. Its head turned toward the camera. The investigation was classified, the files sealed, and the Snallygaster story faded into obscurity. Until now, my troubles started in early September. I began losing cattle, 1 or 2 a week, always at night, always in remote sections of my 300-acre property. At first, I blamed coyotes or feral dogs, but the kills were too brutal, too precise. These animals were not being eaten so much as torn apart, their bodies scattered across 50 yards of pasture. I called the county extension office, had them send out a wildlife expert. He took one look at the remains and went pale. He said he had never seen predation like this, that the claw marks suggested something significantly larger than any native predator. He recommended I contact the state police. I did. They sent a trooper who walked my property for an hour, found nothing conclusive, and filed a report about possible bear activity. But I knew it was not a bear. I had seen bear kills before. This was different. This was methodical, deliberate. And it was escalating. The first time I saw the creature was on a moonless October night. I was checking the south pasture fence line around midnight when I heard it. A sound like canvas snapping in a hurricane, rhythmic and powerful. I looked up and saw a shape pass between me and the stars, a massive silhouette with wings that stretched impossibly wide. It circled once, twice, descending in a slow spiral. And I finally got a clear view. The body was serpentine, easily 20 feet long, covered in overlapping scales that glinted like wet metal. The wings were leathery, bat-like, with a span that had to be 30 feet or more. And the head, the head, reptilian but wrong, too long, too narrow, with rows of teeth visible even in the darkness. It had a single eye, glowing faintly red, fixed directly on me. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs would not obey. The creature hovered for what felt like an eternity, studying me, deciding whether I was worth the effort. Then it banked hard to the left and disappeared over the tree line, the sound of its wings fading into the night. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my porch with a rifle across my lap, watching the sky, waiting for it to return. It did not, but the next morning, I found another cow dead, this one closer to the house than ever before. The snallygaster, if that is what it was getting bolder. I started researching, digging through old newspapers, historical archives, forums dedicated to cryptids and unexplained phenomena. I found patterns. Every few decades, sightings would spike in the Appalachian region, concentrated around specific areas. Frederick County, Washington County, parts of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Always the same description, always the same brutal livestock kills, and always followed by disappearances. People, usually alone, usually at night, vanishing without a trace. The official explanations were always mundane. Lost hikers, runaways, accidents, but the locals knew better. They knew something was hunting in the mountains. I tried to warn my neighbors, told them what I had seen. Most dismissed me as crazy or drunk, but a few, the older farmers who remembered the stories their grandparents told, believed me. One man, a 70-year-old named Earl who lived 3 miles west, said his grandfather had seen the snallygaster in 1909. It had killed a dozen sheep in a single night and attacked his grandfather when he tried to shoot it. The old man survived but was never the same, waking up screaming about the red eye watching him, following him wherever he went. Earl said the creature was not natural, that it was something older than the mountains themselves, something that slept for years and woke only when it was hungry. He told me to leave, to sell the farm and move far away. But I could not. This land was my heritage, my legacy. I would not be driven off by a monster, real or imagined. The attacks intensified. Over the next month, I lost 15 head of cattle, nearly a quarter of my herd. My insurance refused to cover the losses, citing lack of evidence for predation by a known species. I was going bankrupt, my livelihood disappearing one bloody corpse at a time. And the creature kept coming back. I saw it 3 more times, always at night, always circling, always watching with that horrible glowing eye. I tried everything to stop it. I set up motion-activated lights, strung razor wire across the pastures, even called in a friend who owned a drone equipped with a thermal camera. The drone picked up something massive moving through the trees one night, a heat signature far larger than any bear or deer. My friend tried to follow it, but the drone lost power and crashed. When we recovered it the next day, the camera was destroyed, crushed as if something had stepped on it. 2 weeks ago, the creature made its move. I was in the barn around 10 at night, checking on a pregnant cow, when the lights went out. All of them, simultaneously, plunging the barn into absolute darkness. I heard the wings first, that terrible snapping sound, and then the shriek. It was deafening, a high-pitched metallic scream that seemed to pierce straight through my skull. The walls of the barn shook. I felt wind, powerful and cold, rushing through the open doors. Then I heard it land. The impact rattled the entire structure, beams groaning, metal roof panels buckling. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I finally got it on, I saw the creature perched on the rafters 20 feet above me. It was even more horrifying up close. Scales glistening with something wet and foul smelling. Teeth like daggers, dripping saliva. And that eye, glowing red, locked onto me with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. It tilted its head, bird-like, as if trying to understand what I was. Then it opened its mouth and screamed again. Every window in the barn exploded. Glass rained down, shards embedding in my arms and face. I ran, sprinting out of the barn and toward the house, the creature launching itself after me. I felt the wind from its wings, felt talons graze my back, tearing through my jacket. I made it to the porch, dove through the door, and slammed it shut. The creature hit the house a second later, the entire structure shuddering from the impact. I could hear it on the roof, claws scraping across shingles, that horrible shrieking filling the night. I grabbed my rifle, loaded it with every round I had, and waited. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then the windows in the living room exploded inward, and a massive clawed foot reached through, groping blindly. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The creature pulled back, roaring, and took off into the sky. I heard it circling for another hour before it finally left. I am leaving this farm. The bank can have it. I cannot fight something like that. The government will not help. The police think I am insane. My neighbors are either too scared or too stubborn to acknowledge what is happening. The snallygaster is real. It is out there, hunting, killing, terrorizing anyone who gets too close. And it is not alone. I have been reading reports from across the Appalachians, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Tennessee, sightings of winged creatures, massive and reptilian, attacking livestock and people. Whatever these things are, wherever they come from, they are spreading. And nobody is doing anything to stop them. If you live in the mountains, if you see something strange in the sky at night, do not investigate. Do not try to fight it. Just run, because once it sees you, once that red eye locks onto you, it will never stop hunting. Story 9. Witch of South Mountain. The grimoire was bound in leather that felt wrong to the touch. Too smooth, too warm, like it had been made from something that was never meant to be a book cover. I found it in the crawl space beneath my uncle's farmhouse in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, wrapped in oilcloth and buried under 2 feet of dirt. The scary part was not finding it. The scary part was realizing it had my family name written inside the front cover in faded brown ink. Zittle. And beneath that, a date, 1798, the year everything went to hell on South Mountain. I am a genealogist. I trace family histories for a living. My own family always seemed normal. German immigrants, farmers, hard-working people who settled in the Pennsylvania mountains and minded their own business. But when my Uncle Michael died last spring, I inherited his property and started going through his belongings. That is when I found the letters, dozens of them, hidden in the walls, stuffed behind baseboards, buried in the yard. Letters that told a horrifying story my family had been hiding for over 200 years. A story about folk magic, about curses that actually worked, about a woman named Catherine Zittle who became known as the Witch of South Mountain, and about what happened to the families who crossed her. The first letter I found was dated November 1803, written by a man named Johann Weber to his brother in Philadelphia. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Johann described how his family was being destroyed by supernatural forces, how his livestock kept dying, how his children were wasting away from mysterious illnesses, how his wife had gone mad and tried to drown herself in the creek. He blamed Catherine Zittle, called her a Hexenmeister, a practitioner of dark Pennsylvania Dutch magic. He wrote that she had cursed his family after a land dispute and now they were all going to die unless someone stopped her. The disturbing thing was what came next. Legal records from Franklin County. I found them at the county courthouse. In 1804, Catherine Zittle was formally accused of witchcraft. Not unusual for the time, but what was unusual was the evidence presented. Dozens of witnesses, respected farmers and merchants, all swearing under oath that they had seen her perform impossible acts. That she could curse cattle from a distance, that she could cause crops to fail, that she knew things she should not know, that people who angered her suffered terrible fates. The records were meticulous, detailed, written by educated men who clearly believed every word. Catherine was never convicted. The charges were dropped, but not because the court thought she was innocent. The records showed that key witnesses withdrew their testimony, changed their stories, some fled the county entirely, and the magistrate who was overseeing the case died suddenly. Heart failure, at 32 years old. After that, no one wanted to pursue charges against Catherine Zittle. The case was closed. Catherine went back to her farm on South Mountain, and the whispers began. I found testimony from a neighbor named Ernst Hoffman. He described visiting Catherine's property in 1806. He had gone to confront her about his son's illness. The boy had been healthy until he insulted Catherine at a church gathering. Within days, He developed horrible sores that would not heal. Ernst went to Catherine's house to beg for mercy. What he saw there terrified him so much that he sold his farm and moved to Ohio within the month. Catherine's house sat in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees. The air around it smelled like sulfur and rotting meat. Animals refused to go near it. Birds would not fly over it. Inside, Ernst saw things that defied explanation. Books written in languages he did not recognize. Jars containing what looked like preserved organs. Dried herbs hanging from the ceiling that made his eyes water and his skin itch. And Catherine herself, a woman in her 50s with eyes that seemed to look through him. She knew why he had come before he spoke. She knew his son, his name. She knew what Ernst had for breakfast. She knew secrets about Ernst, his family that no one outside his household could possibly know. Catherine told Ernst that his son would recover, but there would be a price. Ernst had to do something for her, something that was not specified in his testimony. Whatever it was, Ernst agreed. His son recovered the next day. The sores vanished, but Ernst was never the same. His later letters to family members show a man consumed by guilt, haunted by what he had done. He never explained what Catherine made him do. He just wrote that some bargains cost more than you can imagine, that some debts follow you beyond the grave. I found more stories as I dug deeper into the archives. The schoolteacher who accused Catherine of poisoning the town well. She went missing in 1809. Her body was found 3 months later in the woods. The coroner ruled it was an animal attack, but witnesses said her body was arranged in a pattern, like some kind of ritual. Her eyes were missing, her mouth was full of dirt, and carved into the tree above her were symbols that no one could identify. The same symbols I would later find in that grimoire from my uncle, his crawl space. A merchant named Ludwig Werner documented an encounter with Catherine in 1812. He was traveling through the mountains and got lost. Night was falling. He saw smoke from a chimney and approached the house hoping for directions. It was Catherine's place. She invited him in, fed him, let him sleep by her fire. But during the night, Ludwig woke to strange sounds, chanting in a language that hurt his ears. He looked through a crack in the door and saw Catherine in the next room. She was standing in a circle drawn on the floor, candles arranged around her, and she was speaking to something that answered back in a voice that did not come from any human throat. Ludwig ran. He got lost in the woods, but eventually found his way to a neighboring farm. He told his story. People believed him, but no one would go back to Catherine's house to investigate. No one wanted to risk her attention. Ludwig wrote that the experience changed him, that he could never sleep properly again, that he would wake up feeling like something was watching him, like Catherine had marked him that night, like some part of him had been claimed by whatever she served. The grimoire I found contained the same symbols Ludwig described, the same chants, written in a mix of German and something older, something that predated German. The book was divided into sections: healing spells, protection charms, curses, and one section that made my hand shake when I read it. Instructions for binding a spirit, for making a pact with something that exists outside normal reality, for trading pieces of your soul in exchange for power. The instructions were specific, detailed, and they had been used. I could tell because there were notes in the margins. Dates, names, results. My family name appeared in those notes. Multiple times. Catherine Zittel had not worked alone. She had help. My ancestors had helped her, had participated in her rituals, had benefited from her magic, and in exchange, they had promised something. A debt that would be passed down through generations. A price that would eventually come due. I found evidence of that price in the family letters. Children who died young, always the firstborn, always in their 7th year. This pattern repeated for over a century. My great-great-great-grandfather, his first son, dead at 7. My great-great-grandfather, his first daughter, dead at 7. The causes varied: illness, accident, unexplained seizures, but the pattern was consistent, terrifying, and it only stopped with my grandfather, his generation. He had been the firstborn. He should have died at 7, but he lived to 83. I found his journal. He wrote about nightmares, about seeing a woman standing at the foot of his bed, an old woman with eyes that glowed in the darkness. Catherine. Still collecting, still demanding payment. My grandfather wrote that he made a deal when he was 7 years old and sick with fever that the doctor said would kill him. He saw Catherine. She offered him life. She offered to break the curse. But he had to promise something in return. He had to keep the grimoire safe, had to hide the evidence of what the family had done, had to ensure that the secret stayed buried. He agreed. He lived, and he spent the rest of his life hiding the truth, burying it literally and figuratively. making sure no one would ever find out about Catherine Zittle and the dark bargain that saved his life. But now I had found it. Now I knew. And the night after I found the grimoire, things started happening. I was staying at my uncle's farmhouse, alone, going through documents. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I looked out the window. No one there, but I could see tracks in the dust, bare feet, leading up to the door, then stopping, like whoever made them had simply vanished. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the air, even though it was August. The smell hit me next. Sulfur and decay. The same smell Ernst Hoffman had described over 200 years ago. I grabbed my keys, started for the door, but it would not open. The lock turned, but the door stayed shut. Like something was holding it closed from the outside. I went to the back door. Same thing. The windows would not open. I was trapped inside. That is when I heard the voice. A woman's voice. Speaking German. I do not speak German, but I understood her anyway. She was asking about the book, asking why I had disturbed it, asking what I intended to do with what I had found. I did not answer, could not answer. My throat was closed. My body would not move. I could only stand there in the kitchen while that voice circled the house. Getting closer, getting louder, until it was right outside the window beside me. I turned and saw her. Catherine Zittle, not as she would look now after 200 years in the grave, but as she had been in life. A woman in her 50s, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, eyes that burned with intelligence and something else, something hungry. She pressed her hand against the window. The glass did not break, but it warped, bent inward, like reality itself was bending around her. She smiled, showed teeth that were too sharp, too many, and then she spoke in English. She told me the debt was not paid, that my grandfather had broken his promise, that he had started writing things down, documenting the family's involvement with her, planning to expose everything before he died. But he had died before he could finish, before he could tell the truth. And now that burden fell to me. I had to make a choice. Keep the secrets buried, burn the grimoire, destroy the letters, let the past stay dead, or face the consequences of exposing her, of telling the world what she was, what she had done, what my family had helped her do. I wanted to refuse, wanted to stand up to this thing that had terrorized my family for generations. But I could feel her power, could feel the weight of 200 years of dark magic pressing against my chest. Could sense that if I chose wrong, I would join the long list of people who had crossed Catherine Zittle and paid the ultimate price. The pressure built. The air grew thicker. I could barely breathe. And then I made my decision. I burned it. Everything. The grimoire, the letters, the legal documents I had copied. All of it went into the fireplace. I watched as 200 years of evidence turned to ash. Watched as the truth about Catherine Zittle and my family, its involvement with her, went up in smoke. And as the last page curled and blackened, the pressure lifted. The temperature returned to normal. The smell faded. Catherine was gone. But she is not really gone. I know that now. I can feel her watching me, waiting to see if I keep my word, waiting to see if I tell anyone what I learned. And the truly terrifying part is that I do not know what would happen if I did. I do not know if she would kill me, or if she would do something worse, something like what she did to those families 200 years ago. Something that would destroy not just me but everyone I love. So I stay silent. I keep the secrets. I live with the knowledge that my family helped a witch terrorize an entire region, that we benefited from dark magic, that we made bargains with something that should not exist. And I wonder how many other families have similar secrets. How many other grimoires are buried beneath old farmhouses? How many other debts are still being collected by things that refuse to die? The folk magic of the Pennsylvania Dutch is not just superstition. It is not just old world beliefs brought over by immigrants and slowly forgotten. Some of it is real. Some of it works. And some of it comes with a price that gets passed down through generations until someone finally has the courage to refuse. I was not that someone. I chose survival over truth, chose silence over exposure, and now I carry the weight of that choice. The weight of knowing that Catherine Zittle is still out there, still watching, still waiting, still collecting on debts that were made before anyone alive today was born. I sold my uncle's farmhouse, moved away from Franklin County, tried to put distance between myself and South Mountain. But some things cannot be escaped with distance. Some things follow you. I still smell sulfur sometimes. Still see shadows that move wrong. Still wake up feeling like something is standing at the foot of my bed. Watching, judging, reminding me that I made a bargain, that I destroyed evidence, that I chose to protect a monster, this legacy instead of exposing it. The worst part is not knowing if I made the right choice. Not knowing if telling the truth would have freed me or damned me. not knowing if Catherine Zittle is really still out there or if she is just a memory. A ghost, a story I tell myself to explain my cowardice. But deep down, I know she is real. I know the magic was real. I know the curses worked, because I can feel the mark she left on me that night. The invisible brand that says I belong to her now, that I am another link in the chain of people who serve her even in death. Another keeper of secrets, another guardian of darkness. And I know that someday, probably when I least expect it, Catherine will come to collect, will demand something from me the way she demanded things from my grandfather, from Ernst Hoffman, from all the others who made deals with the Witch of South Mountain. The debt never ends. It just gets passed along, generation after generation, family member after family member, an endless chain of horror and obligations stretching back over 2 centuries and forward into an unknown future. That is the real nightmare. Not that witches exist, not that dark magic is real, but that once you become entangled with it, once you make even the smallest bargain, you can never truly break free. The debt follows you, shapes you, defines your choices and limits your freedom until you are nothing more than another servant of forces you cannot control or understand. Another victim who became an accomplice. Another person who chose darkness over light because the alternative was too terrifying to imagine. That is what Catherine Zittle does. That is her real curse. She does not just destroy people. She corrupts them, makes them complicit, makes them help her. And that corruption echoes through time like ripples in dark water. Never fading, never stopping, just spreading wider and wider until it touches everyone and everything. Story 10. Petrifying patch of the pitch pine woods. The stone dog is still screaming. Its mouth is frozen open, teeth bared, eyes wide with terror. It has been screaming silently for 90 years, and when I close my eyes at night, I can hear what that scream should sound like. And I know, with absolute certainty, that soon I will be screaming too. My name is Michael Reeves, and I am a geological surveyor from New Jersey. For the past 12 years, I have walked through forests and mountains and wilderness, mapping terrain, collecting samples, documenting the slow changes that shape our landscape. I have seen strange rock formations and unusual mineral deposits and geological anomalies that most people will never witness. But nothing in my education, nothing in my experience, prepared me for what I found in the pitch pine woods of southern New Jersey last October. The woods are deep and old, a sprawling wilderness of twisted pine trees and sandy soil that stretches for miles. Most people avoid them. The locals say the woods are cursed. They tell stories about people who wandered in and never came out, about strange sounds in the night, about a place deep in the forest where nothing living can survive. I thought they were just legends, small-town superstition, the kind of scary stories people tell to keep outsiders away. I was wrong. The state hired me to survey a proposed construction site. A new highway was being planned, cutting straight through the heart of the pitch pine woods. My job was to map the area, identify any geological concerns, and file a report. Simple work, routine. I expected to spend a week walking grid patterns through the forest, taking measurements, and heading home. Instead, I found something that has destroyed my ability to sleep, my ability to feel safe, my ability to believe that the world follows any rules I understand. I started the survey on a cold Monday morning. The air was crisp and smelled like pine and damp earth. Fog rolled through the trees, making visibility poor. I marked my starting point on my GPS and began walking east, following my planned route. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels rustling in the branches, no insects buzzing, just the sound of my boots crunching on fallen pine needles and my own breathing. After about 2 hours of walking, I noticed something strange. The trees ahead of me looked different. Their bark was darker, harder. The texture was wrong. I approached one and ran my hand over the trunk. It felt like stone, cold and smooth and absolutely solid. I tapped it with my knuckles. The sound was hollow and echoing, like knocking on concrete. I checked another tree. Same thing. The wood had somehow transformed into a stone-like substance. The bark, the branches, even the pine needles still clinging to the limbs. All of it hard and cold and dead, petrified, but not in the normal way that petrification happens, which takes millions of years in specific geological conditions. This was different. The trees still looked alive, still green in places, but they were solid stone. I pulled out my hammer and chipped a sample from one of the trunks. The interior was the same, completely mineralized. I bagged the sample and marked the location on my GPS. This was unusual, definitely worth documenting, but I had no idea yet how truly terrifying it was. How much danger I was in, how close I was to becoming part of the nightmare myself. I kept walking. The petrified trees became more frequent. Within another 100 yards, every tree around me was stone. The ground beneath my feet felt harder. I knelt down and brushed away the pine needles. The soil had transformed too. The sand and dirt had fused into a smooth, glassy surface, like someone had baked the earth at incredible temperatures. And then I saw the flowers. They were growing in a small clearing just ahead. Wildflowers in full bloom, bright colors standing out against the gray stone forest. I walked toward them, relieved to see something living in this dead landscape. But as I got closer, my relief turned to horror. The flowers were not alive. They were stone. Every petal, every stem, every leaf was frozen in perfect detail. A butterfly was caught mid-flight above them, its wings spread, its body suspended in the air. Except it was not suspended. It was attached to a thin spike of mineralized air, a column of stone that rose from the ground and held the insect in place. The butterfly was stone too. I could see every scale on its wings, every hair on its body, all of it transformed into cold, dead mineral. I reached out to touch it, and that is when I felt the coldness. Not temperature cold, something else, a pulling sensation. Like the air itself was trying to draw something out of me. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away from the flowers, my heart pounding. I should have turned around right then. Should have marked the area as hazardous and left immediately. But I'm a scientist. Curiosity is part of my nature. And I had to know what was causing this. Had to understand the mechanism. Had to see how far it extended. I pulled out my measuring tape and began documenting the perimeter of the petrified zone. I worked carefully, staying on what I thought was the safe side of the boundary. The zone was roughly circular, maybe 30 yards across. Everything inside that circle was stone. Everything outside was normal living forest. The transition was sharp and clear. One step you were in the living world. One step forward and you entered the dead zone. That is when I found the hunter. He was standing at the edge of the circle, his body half in and half out of the petrified zone. His legs and lower body were stone, gray and solid and frozen, but his upper body was still flesh. Still decaying. The smell was overwhelming, rotten mold and something else, something chemical. His face was turned back over his shoulder, looking toward the forest behind him. His eyes were gone, eaten by insects long ago, but his mouth was open in a silent scream. His hands were raised in front of him, fingers spread, like he was trying to push something away. And beside him, also half stone, was his dog. A hunting dog, maybe a beagle. Its back legs and hindquarters transformed to mineral while its front half remained organic. Or what was left of it after decades of decay. Its mouth was open, teeth bared, frozen in the same expression of absolute terror as its master. I stared at them for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. These were not recent deaths. The clothing on the hunter looked old. 1930s, maybe? 40 at the latest. He had been here for almost 90 years, standing at the edge of this cursed circle, his lower body slowly turning to stone while his upper body rotted away. Trapped between two states, unable to move forward or back, dying slowly in unimaginable horror. I took photos, measurements, samples from the boundary zone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my equipment. The hunter's empty eye sockets seemed to watch me as I worked. Accusing, warning, begging me to understand before it was too late. I marked the location and finally, turned to leave. I had everything I needed for my report. More than enough evidence to declare this area unsuitable for construction. I would file my findings, let someone else figure out what was happening here, and never come back. That was the plan. That was what I should have done. But as I walked away from the circle, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The boundary was not where I had marked it an hour ago. The petrified zone had expanded. Not by much, maybe 6 inches, maybe less, but it had definitely grown. The stick I had placed to mark the edge was now inside the dead zone. Its tip had turned to stone. I ran. I crashed through the forest, following my GPS back to my truck, my mind racing with implications. If the zone was expanding, if it was slowly spreading outward, then eventually it would consume the entire forest. Then the towns beyond the forest. Then the cities, an expanding circle of death, turning everything it touched to silent, frozen stone. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to the state geological office. I filed my report that same day, included all my photos and samples and measurements, marked the area as extremely hazardous, recommended immediate further investigation by specialists, expected someone to take this seriously. They did not. They thanked me for my thoroughness. said they would look into it, suggested I take a few days off, rest, maybe see someone about the stress. The way they looked at me, I knew they thought I was crazy, that I had made it all up or misinterpreted what I saw. They filed my report away and proceeded with their highway plans like nothing was wrong. I could not let it go. I returned to the Pitch Pine Woods 3 weeks later, this time on my own. I had to know if the zone was still expanding. Had to see if I was right or if I really had lost my mind out there in the forest. The petrified circle had grown. It was now almost 40 yards across, 10 yards larger than when I first found it. Trees that had been alive and green were now stone. Ground that had been soft and living was now hard and dead. And the hunter and his dog were completely mineralized now. No flesh remained. They were solid stone statues, frozen forever in their final moment of terror. I measured the expansion rate, roughly 3 yards per month. At that rate, the circle would reach the nearest town in about 5 years. Would cover the entire forest in 15. Would consume the surrounding counties in 30. An unstoppable wave of petrification. Slowly but inevitably spreading across the landscape. I tried again to sound the alarm. Contacted news stations, environmental agencies, universities, anyone who might listen. Most ignored me. A few investigated and found nothing. The zone is deep in the woods, far from any trails or roads. Easy to miss if you are not looking for it. And by the time anyone official bothered to check, they must have concluded I was mistaken. Too much time had passed. Memories fade, exact locations become uncertain, but I know what I saw. I know what is out there. And I have continued to monitor it. Every month for the past 8 months, I have returned to the Pitch Pine Woods and measured the expansion. And every month, the dead zone grows. Slowly, steadily, inevitably. Last month, I noticed something new. Something that filled me with a dread so deep I have barely slept since. There were footprints leading into the circle. Fresh footprints. Human. Someone had walked into the petrified zone recently, and they had not walked back out. I followed the prints. They led straight to the center of the circle, to a spot where the petrification seemed most intense. The ground there was perfectly smooth, like polished marble. The air above it shimmered slightly, like heat rising from pavement. And in the center of that spot stood a figure. A woman, maybe 30 years old. She was completely stone, frozen mid-step, 1 foot raised, arms outstretched for balance. Her face was turned upward, mouth open, eyes wide. The expression was not terror. It was surprise, like she had not realized what was happening until it was too late. Like the transformation had come so fast, she barely had time to register it. Her clothes were modern. Jeans, hiking boots, a jacket. She had been here recently. Maybe days ago, maybe hours. The stone was still fresh, still sharp-edged where her fingers reached into empty air. She had walked into this cursed place, and in seconds or minutes, she had become part of it. Another statue in a growing gallery of the dead. I left immediately. I did not take samples. Did not take measurements. I just ran, because I felt it, that pulling sensation. Stronger now, like the air itself was hungry, like the zone was reaching for me, trying to draw me in, trying to add me to its collection. I reported the woman, filed a missing person report with the local police. They searched the woods for 3 days and found nothing. The petrified zone is well hidden. Unless you know exactly where to look, you could walk within 50 feet of it and never see it. The police concluded the woman had probably gotten lost and died of exposure somewhere else in the forest. They stopped searching, filed the case away, forgot about her. But she is still there, standing in the center of that cursed circle, turning slowly gray as the minerals consume her. And she is not alone anymore. 2 weeks ago, I went back one final time. I had to see, had to know if it was still growing. The circle has expanded to almost 50 yards across, and there are more statues now. A man crouched at the edge, hand reaching for something just outside the boundary. A deer caught mid-leap, all 4 hooves off the ground, suspended on thin spikes of mineralized air. A bird frozen in flight, wings spread, beak open in a song that will never be heard. And at the very center, next to the woman, was something new. Something that made me understand the true horror of this place. There was a child, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, holding a doll. Both of them stone, both of them frozen. The girl, its face showed confusion more than fear, like she had wandered into the circle chasing a butterfly or following a rabbit and simply stopped. Stopped moving, stopped living, turned to stone before she could even understand what was happening. I called the police again, told them about the child, begged them to search. They did, for 1 day, found nothing, told me to stop wasting their time. threatened to charge me with filing false reports if I kept this up. So I have stopped reporting, but I have not stopped monitoring. I go back every month, sometimes more often. I measure the expansion, document the new statues, watch the circle grow, and I have come to a terrible conclusion. This is not a natural phenomenon. This is not some weird geological process or environmental contamination. This is something else, something ancient, something that has been sleeping in the pitch pine woods for who knows how long. And now it is waking up, growing, spreading, consuming everything in its path. I have dreams now, terrible dreams. I dream I am walking through the forest and I step into the circle without realizing it. I feel the coldness spreading through my feet, up my legs, into my body. I try to run but I cannot move. I try to scream but my lungs have turned to stone. I watch my hands calcify, feel my heart slow and stop and harden, and then I am frozen, aware but unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to die, just standing there forever in the silent forest while the world moves on without me. I wake from these dreams gasping, my whole body cold, my heart pounding. And I know, somehow I know, that these are not just nightmares. They are premonitions, warnings. The circle is calling to me. It wants me, wants to add me to its collection. And eventually, I will answer that call. Because I cannot stay away. I tell myself every month that this will be the last time. That I will stop going back. Stop checking on it. Stop documenting its expansion. But I always return, drawn by something I cannot explain. Compelled to witness this slow apocalypse. Last week, I measured the boundary again. The circle is now 60 yards across. Growing faster, accelerating. At this new rate, it will reach the nearest road in 2 years. We'll reach the first houses in 3. And still nobody believes me. Still nobody is doing anything to stop it. I am writing this as a record, as a warning, as proof that I am not crazy. The pitch pine woods are harboring something terrifying and inexplicable. Something that turns living things to stone. Something that is expanding, slowly consuming the forest, and eventually will spread far beyond it. If you live in southern New Jersey, if you ever hike in the pitch pine woods, stay away from the center. Stay away from any area where the forest seems too quiet, where the trees look wrong, where the ground is too hard beneath your feet. Because the petrified circle is there, waiting, growing, hungry. And if you see statues in the forest, if you see stone figures frozen in terror, run. Do not investigate. Do not take photos. Do not try to understand. Just run. Because the circle expands faster than you think. Because the transformation happens in seconds. Because once you step inside that cursed zone, there is no escape. You will feel the coldness spreading through you. Will watch your own body turn to stone. Will have just enough time to understand what is happening before your brain mineralizes and your thoughts stop forever. I am going back tomorrow. One more measurement. One more documentation. I know I should not. I know it is dangerous. But I have to see. Have to know how much it has grown. How close it is getting to the edge of the forest. How much time we've left before this slow horror becomes impossible to ignore. And part of me, a dark part that I try not to acknowledge, wants to step into the circle. Wants to feel that coldness. Wants to become stone. Because at least then I would stop having the dreams. Stop feeling the constant dread. Stop knowing that this nightmare is real and unstoppable and coming for all of us. The stone dog is still screaming. The hunter is still running. The woman is still walking. The child is still reaching for her doll. And soon, I will join them. Another statue in the pitch pine woods. Another silent witness to the slow petrification of the world.